This is the story of a girl who loved her father more than anything in the world and still ended up becoming the price of his greatest mistake. She didn't have a famous name, no crown, no title, no mention on the scrolls of judges, kings, or priests, but what she did have, what she gave, echoed long after. To support our ministry, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out our Bible storybooks with new releases every other day. Link in the description. Once upon a time, there lived a girl, and she was Jephthah's daughter. She grew up believing that her father's love could outlast any war. They had always been close, closer than most fathers and daughters in their village, closer than many dared to be. Her mother had died young, and Jephthah, though hardened by rejection, scarred by exile, and worn from battles, had made time for her. That was who he was to her, brave, thoughtful, fierce, and gentle, all in one. Even when others mocked him for being the son of a prostitute, even when his brothers pushed him out of the family and sent him into the wilderness, even when he became a mercenary living by the sword, she still loved him. Because to her, he was just Abba. That's why, when the elders begged him to return and fight for Israel, she had kissed his cheek and said, "Come back with honor." He had smiled, and then he had left. What she didn't know, what he never told her, was what he said in secret. "If you give me victory, Lord," he had prayed, "I will offer whatever comes out of my house first when I return, as a sacrifice. Not a lamb, not a bull, whatever came out." And now? Now she stood at the edge of the courtyard, staring at the path where his footsteps would soon appear. Music floated from the tent behind her, flutes and timbrels she'd gathered for the welcome celebration. She had spent all morning weaving flowers into garlands and preparing a song. She hadn't seen him in weeks. She missed his voice, missed his crooked smile, missed the way he tapped her forehead when she overthought things. And then, there he was, walking slowly, covered in dust, tired eyes, bow still strapped to his back. "Abba," she called out, her voice bright like sunlight after a storm. He froze. She didn't notice. She rushed forward, arms wide, garlands in hand, smile bursting. She reached him, and something changed. His eyes didn't fill with joy. His hands didn't lift to catch her. Instead, his knees buckled slightly. He looked at her as if she were a ghost. Her heart skipped. "Father?" she asked. He didn't answer. He just whispered, "Oh God, no." And that's when the story changed. That's when she realized he had made a vow, and she had just stepped into it. But this wasn't a story about fear. It wasn't even about death. This was a story about what it means to be brave. When the whole world goes silent, she stepped back. Not because she was afraid of him, but because something in his face broke, like a pot dropped from a rooftop. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning and hadn't yet figured out whether he was still alive. "Father," she said again, slower this time. What's wrong?" His lips moved, but no sound came. Then finally, in a voice so low she barely heard it, he said, I didn't know it would be you." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He turned away from her, dragging his hands over his face. His fingers trembled. The garland of flowers she had made was still clutched in her hand, the petals beginning to wilt from how tightly she was holding it. "I made a vow," he whispered. She waited. "To the Lord," he continued, I said, If he gave me victory, I would offer whatever came out of my house first, as a burnt offering. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that feels like everything in your chest just cracked. She opened her mouth, closed it again, and then, because she had always been the braver one, she said softly, "And I was the first." He turned, and for the first time in her life, she saw her father cry. His shoulders shook. He tried to kneel, but his legs gave out. "No!" he moaned. "You were supposed to be married. You were supposed to live. You were supposed to have songs sung about your joy. Not this." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she knelt beside him. "You made a vow to God," she said. "And I'm his too, aren't I?" He looked at her, confused. She nodded slowly. "If I belong to him, and you made a promise to him, then maybe this is part of his story too." "You don't understand," he said. "I don't want to lose you. You're all I have." She swallowed hard, her throat burning. "I don't want to go," she whispered. "But if I must, let me do it with courage." He pressed his forehead to hers, both of them kneeling in the dust. "I should have known better," he murmured. "I should have trusted God without trying to bargain." She didn't blame him. She just held on to him. And then, slowly, she said, "Give me 2 months. Let me go into the hills with my friends to mourn what won't be." His arms tightened. "Anything," he whispered. "Anything you ask." She pulled back, just enough to look him in the eye. "Then I'll come back." She meant it. She wasn't trying to run away. She didn't want to escape, but she wanted to understand, to process, to say goodbye to the dreams she'd once held like fireflies in her hands. She stood up, wiping her eyes. The garland had dropped beside them, petals scattered in the dirt. He stayed kneeling as she walked away, back into the house, back into her room, back into silence. But her steps were steady, and her heart, though breaking, still beat with something deeper than fear. Faith. The hills looked different when you knew you were running out of time. She climbed slowly, her sandals pressing into dry dirt and soft moss, her friends walking a little behind her in silence. These were the same girls she had grown up with, the ones she'd braided flowers with, whispered secrets to during festivals, danced beside under moonlight. But today, they didn't talk. They followed her. She had only brought what she needed: a water skin, some fruit, a blanket, and a small carved flute she used to play when her father was away at war. The wind brushed against her cheeks like a whisper. No one said it out loud, but they all knew this wasn't just a journey to the hills, it was a goodbye. When they reached the top, she turned around and looked at the valley below, the winding river, the rooftops of her village, the temple where sacrifices were offered. She sat on a large, flat rock and finally broke the silence. "I'm not afraid of dying," she said softly, "but I do wonder why." One of the girls, Tamar, sat beside her. "Why what?" "Why my life had to end like this," she said, eyes still on the valley. "Why this vow was ever made. Why God allowed it." No one answered right away. Then Tamar said gently, "Maybe it's not about the end." She looked over. "Maybe it's about what your life meant," Tamar said. "You honored God, and you honored your father. You're brave." She smiled a little. "Brave and sad," she whispered. Another friend, Eliah, sat down on the other side. "When we were little, you told me you wanted to ride a chariot into battle one day." She laughed. "I did say that." You were always doing wild things, Elias said, grinning. Climbing the fig trees, chasing the boys with sticks. I remember that, Tamar laughed. You were fierce and loud. They all laughed for the first time in days. The sun felt warmer, the wind less heavy. Then she said quietly, Do you think people will remember me? Yes, Tamar said instantly. We will. And maybe, Eliah added, your story will remind others what it means to keep a promise, even when it hurts. She let that settle. She hadn't chosen this ending, but maybe she could still choose how it would be remembered. I want you to promise me something, she said. They leaned in. Every year, she said, come back here. Not to cry, but to live, to sing, to dance. They nodded, tears shining in their eyes. She stood slowly and looked toward the setting sun. I want this place to be filled with life, she said, not just memory. And for the next 2 months, that's what they did. They sang, they told stories, they remembered what it meant to live. Even as the end drew closer, she filled each day with more courage than most people use in a lifetime. Jephthah didn't sleep much after the victory. He should have been celebrating. The people had finally stopped calling him an outsider. They had cheered his name, lifted him onto their shoulders, crowned him with olive branches, but none of it mattered. He couldn't stop thinking about the moment she ran toward him, arms wide, smile bright, and how quickly his joy turned to horror. He had made the vow. No one forced him, no one tricked him, and she was the first to come out. He remembered the silence after his cry, how she stopped in her tracks, tilted her head, and said, Father? He hadn't answered. Not then. Not for a long time. Now back in his tent, he sat with the edges of his robe bunched in his hands. His commanders were outside, arguing about borders and treaties. None of it mattered. His daughter's words echoed in his head, You made a promise. Keep it. Just give me time to mourn. He had always thought himself a strong man, a warrior, a leader. But she was stronger than him. He stood and walked toward the edge of camp, where the hills began to rise. He looked up at the narrow path she had taken. He could barely see the figures in the distance, girls walking along the ridge like shadows against the sky. He pressed a hand to his chest. His heart felt like it had split in two, one part proud, the other part breaking. God, he whispered, I don't understand this. I don't know why this was the cost. The wind rustled through the trees like a quiet answer. He turned away and went back into his tent, slower than before. Far away, on the hilltop, his daughter stood with her eyes closed, letting the breeze sweep through her hair. She didn't cry much anymore, not because she wasn't sad, but because she had made peace. She had grown up with her father's stories. She knew what it meant to be a warrior, but she had never expected to become one herself. Not like this. She knelt beside a pile of stones and began stacking them carefully, one on top of another, hands steady, eyes focused. A memorial. Not just for herself, but for every girl whose story would never be told. And in the distance, as the sun sank behind the hills, her father watched from the shadows, still torn, still waiting, still learning what it meant to let go. She had never been away from home this long. At first, the hills had felt like freedom. Open sky, quiet air, no duties, no expectations. Just her and the wind and the friends who chose to come with her. But now, on the 6th day, everything felt heavier. She pressed her palm against a tree trunk, breathing slowly. The bark was cool under her skin. Still, her heart wouldn't calm. What kind of girl gets remembered for dying? She wondered. She looked at her friend Tirzah, who was weaving wildflowers into a loop. Tirzah always smiled too much, like she was trying to fight sadness with beauty. Another girl, Mara, was collecting smooth stones from the stream bed. They all knew what was coming. No one said it, but they knew. She turned her gaze upward. The sky was brilliant and blue, not a single cloud. Why did I run to him? Why not wait? Why not let someone else walk out first? But she knew that wasn't the point. Even now, she didn't regret embracing her father that day. That moment had been pure, unthinking, full of love. It was everything after that that hurt. I used to think, she said aloud, that God only wanted sacrifices like sheep or flour. But what if he wanted something else? Tirzah looked up. Like what? She shrugged. Trust. Obedience. Something deeper. Mara threw a stone into the water. Then why let this happen to you? She stared at the ripples. Maybe so others remember what not to vow. The wind shifted. Suddenly, from farther down the slope, she heard a sound, like footsteps. She stood up, alert. A figure was approaching, fast. Tirzah grabbed her arm. It's a man! Her heart kicked in her chest, but as the figure came closer, she realized it wasn't a soldier. It was someone older, ragged robes, leaning on a wooden staff. A prophet. He didn't speak at first. He simply looked at her, his eyes wet, like he had been crying for hours. I dreamed of you, he finally said. The girls exchanged glances. She stepped forward. Who are you? Someone who watches and listens, he said. I saw your father's vow. I saw your face when you ran to him. The girl's jaw tightened. You saw it and didn't stop it? I'm not God, he said quietly. But he is watching. And he weeps too. Something in her chest broke open at that. She didn't want to cry, but she did. And the prophet placed something small into her hand, a stone etched with strange markings. A reminder, he said, that even unnamed daughters are never forgotten by heaven. The prophet was gone by morning. No one had seen him leave. One moment, he had been sitting beside the fire with his weathered hands folded and his staff laid across his lap. The next, gone. Like a whisper, the wind carried off in the night. But the stone he gave her stayed clenched in her palm. Shira rolled it between her fingers again and again. It wasn't large. Just a smooth river stone, worn by time, but carved with symbols she didn't recognize. Not Hebrew. Not from any scrolls she'd studied. But the carvings somehow felt familiar, like an echo from deep inside. What do you think it means? Tirzah asked, leaning against a nearby tree. She didn't answer at first. Then after a moment, she said softly, I think it means I'm not invisible. The girls around her nodded solemnly. They weren't just friends anymore. They were witnesses. Every tear, every silent moment, every prayer, they were holding it all with her. Later that afternoon, while the others gathered water, she climbed a small ridge alone, the stone tight in her grip. She stared at the valley stretching below. The world kept going. Carts rolled, sheep grazed, fires burned in homes, people laughed, and no one knew what was happening on this hill, no one but her and her father. She closed her eyes, remembering when she was little and her father would chase her through the olive trees. She'd hide behind a trunk, giggling. He'd pretend he couldn't find her and then suddenly scoop her up from behind, tickling her until she shrieked with laughter. She remembered the smell of his cloak, the calluses on his hands, the way he sang off-key while tending the fire at night. That man loved me. So why had he made the vow? She sat on the ground, drawing lines in the dirt with a stick. What if she ran? What if she climbed down the ridge and disappeared into another village, changed her name, started over, lived? But then she imagined her father's face, twisted with grief and guilt, and her own, twisted with shame for walking away. "I don't want to die," she whispered. And for the first time, she admitted it. "I want to live. I want to have a home. I want to see what's beyond these hills. I want to build something with my own hands." She turned the stone again in her palm. A small wind passed through the ridge. In the silence, it almost sounded like a voice. "You are more than this vow." The thought made her breath catch. More? How could she be more? "I was born from a promise," she said to no one. "But maybe I don't have to end with one." She looked down at the valley again, eyes narrowing. Maybe there was another way. Maybe there was still something she could choose. The moment she stepped back into the camp, her father looked up. He was sitting alone near the fire pit, hunched over, his face rough with sleeplessness. His sword lay beside him, not sharp, not polished, just there, like it had nothing left to do. She didn't say anything right away, neither did he. Then, slowly, she walked toward him and sat across the fire. He spoke first. "I didn't think you'd come back." She shrugged. "I thought about running." His eyes didn't meet hers. "You should have." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the carved stone. "I didn't." Jephthah finally looked up, really looked at her. His eyes were full of something she couldn't name. Not just sorrow, not just fear. It was something deeper, like he'd finally realized she was her own person, not just his daughter, not just a piece of his life, but someone with a soul, a voice. He stared at the stone in her hand. "What is that?" "A gift," she said, "from someone who sees me." There was silence again. "I was trying to prove I wasn't like the others," Jephthah finally said. "They never believed in me. I thought if I gave God something big, something no one else would give, he'd accept me." She didn't speak. "I didn't know it would be you," he whispered. "You ran out to meet me, dancing, smiling. I thought—" "That God would want something smaller," she interrupted, her voice quiet but steady. He winced. "You made the vow," she said. "But I'm not here just because of what you said. I'm here because I have something to say too." Jephthah looked at her, confused. "I will not live angry," she said, "and I will not die forgotten." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She smiled, not sad, strong. "I want to choose what happens next." The next morning, she climbed the tallest hill near the edge of the valley, where the wind could be heard before it touched you. A place where you could see the entire land, the scattered tents, the winding river, even the old trees far beyond where the road bent. She tied her hair back, not like a girl heading to a festival, but like someone about to face something bigger than herself. 3 of her closest friends followed behind, quiet, unsure what to say. At the top, she finally turned around. "2 moons," she said. "That's what I asked for. Just 2 moons to prepare." One of the girls, Tirzah, stepped forward. "We don't want you to do this." "I know," she said. "But your father." It's not about him anymore." They stared at her, confused. "It's not even about the vow," she added. "It's about finishing the story well." Another friend, Mara, blinked. "But how can you finish well when this wasn't fair from the beginning?" She looked at them both, breathing deep. "Maybe I can't change the vow, but I can change what people remember. If I go silent, they'll just remember a girl who disappeared. But if I speak, if I stand strong, maybe the next girl won't be forgotten." They were quiet. The wind moved through their clothes like a whisper. Finally, she walked toward the edge of the hill and sat down. "I want to tell you my story," she said. "All of it. The dancing, the dreams, the moments I thought I'd live forever. I want you to carry it." "You want us to remember you?" Tirzah asked softly. "No," she said with a sad smile. "I want you to remember yourself. I want you to be the girl who doesn't wait for permission to speak, to build, to be brave." Mara sat beside her. "And what about your father?" She looked toward the valley. "Maybe he'll hear it too." When they came down from the hill that evening, the air felt different, like the sky had swallowed something heavy. The other girls kept close to her side, their laughter quieter, their steps more careful. Word had spread that Jephthah's daughter had accepted her fate, but no one seemed to know what to do with that. Some stared, some whispered, some looked away. She noticed it all, but didn't shrink. That night her father sat outside his tent again, just like he had the night before. His armor was off, and his sword lay across his knees like it didn't belong there anymore. She approached quietly, holding a small bowl of honeyed dates. "Your favorite," she said, placing it in front of him. He didn't look up. "You're not afraid?" She sat beside him. "I was. And now. I'm still sad, but I'm not afraid." He ran a hand through his beard. "I should have never made that vow." She didn't argue, just waited. "I thought maybe if I offered God something big, he'd make me win. I thought I had to earn his help." She looked at him, surprised. "You think God helped you just because of your promise?" He didn't answer. She shifted to face him. "Abba, I think he helped you because he loves his people, not because you said the right words." He finally met her eyes. "Then why didn't he stop me?" Her voice softened. "Maybe he tried. Maybe you couldn't hear him over your own shouting." Jephthah breathed slowly. "I fought to save Israel. I didn't think it would cost me you." She rested her head on his shoulder. "And I danced to welcome you home. I didn't think it would be my last song." They sat in silence for a while, the stars rising above them like 1,000 questions. After a time, she said, "I want to leave something behind. A story, not just of sorrow, but of courage." He looked at her. "What do you want me to do?" "Let the people come. Let the women sing. Let them remember that a girl stood strong when it would have been easier to run." Jephthah nodded, tears shining in his battle-worn eyes. 4 days before the end, the young women of Israel came. They didn't bring weapons. They didn't come to beg or protest. They came with tambourines, with baskets of food, with fabrics embroidered in purple and gold. Some came because they admired her courage. Others came because they wanted to understand it. By the second day, her father's house was surrounded. Jephthah looked out his tent flap and shook his head. "They treat you like a queen." She smiled. "Not a queen, Abba, a sister." One of the older women brought her a long white robe threaded with silver. "You should be honored before heaven," she said. "You are giving what no man was ever asked to give." The daughter touched the cloth. "I'm not sure what I'm giving yet," she said softly. "But I know I want it to mean something." Each day, more girls joined her on the hills. They didn't dance for a feast. They danced for mourning. They danced for memory. They danced because sometimes a girl's voice could be louder through rhythm than through shouting. One evening, while the others were gathered around the fire, she slipped away. Her father found her staring out at the valley where he had once ridden home victorious. "I keep thinking," she said, "about the moment I ran to you. I didn't know. I was just so happy." He didn't speak. "And now," she whispered, "I wonder if I was too happy, if joy made me careless." "No," he said quickly, stepping closer. "Don't ever regret joy. It's the one thing we get to choose." They stood in silence. She looked up at him. "Do you still think God needs big sacrifices?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "I think God wanted me to trust, not to bargain." She gave a tiny nod. "Then maybe he can still use this. Maybe this story can teach someone to trust instead." He looked down at her, eyes filled with pain and pride. "You've already taught me." When the final sunrise came, the sky was strangely peaceful. No thunder, no weeping clouds, just soft orange light filtering through the trees and settling over the hills like a blanket. The daughter stood at the edge of the meadow, barefoot in the dew, robe sweeping the grass. Her friends stood behind her in silence. Some were crying. Others just held each other's hands. She turned once, gave a half smile, and walked forward. Jephthah waited by the altar. His hands trembled. His eyes were red. A carved stone sat at the center, clean, cold, final. "I don't want to do this," he whispered when she arrived. "I know," she said gently. "I was wrong to vow it. Wrong to speak for God. And yet," she stepped forward and took his hand, "and yet, we both know the cost of going back on a word." He swallowed hard. "You were my joy." "And you were mine," she replied. They stood together in the quiet. Then she turned to face the altar, but instead of laying down, she pulled a small pouch from her robe. "What's that?" Jephthah asked, confused. She opened the pouch. Inside were seeds: wild fig, olive, and almond. "I don't want my story to end with silence," she said. "Let something grow here." She stepped past the altar and began planting seeds in the soft dirt beside it, one by one. Her father didn't stop her. Neither did the crowd watching from a distance. She pressed the final seed into the ground and whispered, "Let life rise from the vow. Let someone remember not just what was lost, but what could still bloom." Then she looked at her father. "I'm ready." He stepped forward, eyes wet with sorrow, but something in him had shifted. The altar no longer looked like the end. It looked like a place of turning, a place where something deeper than sacrifice could happen. He took a deep breath, and the story changed. Seasons passed. The field where the altar once stood had changed. Wild fig trees took root where her fingers had pressed seeds into the earth. A single almond tree stretched taller than the rest, its branches like arms reaching toward heaven. The people no longer spoke of Jephthah's victory. That story faded. But some whispered of the girl, the one who met her fate without fear, the one who planted life where others expected only death. A path slowly formed through the field. Not because anyone planned it, but because travelers began visiting. Young women especially. They left pieces of thread, carved bits of wood, small notes with scribbled prayers tucked beneath the fig leaves. They didn't call it a shrine. They didn't need to. It became a place of memory, a place of resolve. And the girl's name, though never written, was remembered in songs passed from mother to daughter, from sister to friend. As for Jephthah, he never went to war again. He spent his final years walking the borders of that field, guarding its silence, answering the questions of those brave enough to ask. Was she afraid? Yes, but she did not let fear win. Did you regret your vow? Every day. But I would have regretted breaking it even more. One spring, an orphan girl came running to him in the field. She had fled the city after her uncle tried to sell her as a servant. Jephthah looked at her, eyes soft. What's your name? She hesitated. I don't have one anymore. Then I'll call you daughter, he said. And from then on, more came. Not because he was a great leader anymore, but because he was the father who had once loved a girl enough to weep when he lost her and wise enough not to let the rest of his life die with her. He built no monuments, he gave no speeches, but he gave shelter. And he listened. And in doing so, Jephthah became something more than a tragic man with a foolish vow. He became the soil her story grew in. And even now, when the fig trees bloom in that quiet field, the wind carries a whisper that doesn't fade. She was not forgotten. Years later, girls from all over the hill country still walked that winding trail to the fig-lined clearing. Some came barefoot, some came with tears, some came with scrolls of poetry or plans for things no one had built yet. They didn't all know what happened there, but they felt something in the soil, in the quiet, in the way the wind always stirred no matter the season. One girl, maybe 16, sat with her knees drawn to her chest. They say she died here, the girl whispered, but it doesn't feel like death. Next to her, a much older woman smiled. That's because she didn't just die. She offered. Why? The girl asked. She could have run. I would have run. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a carved pendant, wooden, in the shape of a fig leaf. The lines were worn smooth from years of holding. She stayed, the woman said softly, because she trusted God more than she feared pain, and because she wanted her father to keep his word, even if it cost her something. The girl stared at the carving. But that's not fair. It's not, the woman said. But sometimes the most unfair stories leave the most powerful seeds behind. She closed the girl's fingers around the pendant. That's what you carry now. All across the region, women began to build small gatherings, not temples, not sanctuaries, but spaces, safe places for teaching, for stories, for remembering. The kinds of places Jephthah's daughter never had. They called them the daughters' rooms. Not one of them bore her name, but all of them bore her spirit. And in the minds of those who dared to dream, she wasn't just a girl who had been lost. She was the reason others were now found. They never carved her name in stone. There was no festival in her honor, no scroll of songs sung in her memory, but somehow her story lived. It lived in how mothers told their daughters, "Be brave like her." It lived in the quiet decisions girls made when no one was watching, when they told the truth, when they stayed loyal, when they trusted God even when it didn't make sense. It lived in Jephthah, too. Long after the battles were over, after his sword had dulled and his strength faded, The only thing he remembered with perfect clarity was the way she had smiled at him that day. That smile undid him. He never returned to the battlefield. He never raised a sword again. Instead, he spent the rest of his days tending the land near Mizpah, keeping a small grove alive, figs, vines, and almond trees all surrounding a single flat stone. He never spoke of what happened, but he never stopped remembering. Some say he built benches for the daughters who came to mourn. Others say he left flowers every season, fresh and quiet. No one really knows. But what they do know is this. In a time when men ruled and women were often silenced, one girl gave up her future with open eyes. Not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to believe in a promise bigger than herself, and even though her name was never written, God remembered. And that was enough.